Jack Miller, a battle-worn veteran, was driving through a storm-soaked Montana night when his headlights caught something trembling in the rain. A tiny, shivering puppy abandoned on the roadside. He wrapped it in his jacket, whispering, "You're safe now," unaware that what he carried home wasn't a puppy at all. Days later, when the creature's golden eyes began to glow in the dark, and the vet revealed the shocking truth, Jack realized this was no ordinary rescue. It was a test of faith, a miracle written by God's own hand. Before we begin, please like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes that even the smallest act of kindness can change everything. The rain had fallen since dawn, turning the dirt roads of northern Montana into veins of dark glass beneath a sky the color of bruised steel. By the time Jack Miller finished his 12-hour shift at the freight yard, his boots were soaked, and his shoulders carried more than the weight of his day. Jack was 47, a man shaped by both war and work. His frame was broad, carved by years of labor. His beard, streaked with gray, traced the sharp edge of a jaw that once commanded men under fire. There were lines on his face that didn't belong to age, but to memory, the kind that never fades after a soldier returns home. The townsfolk said he had the quiet eyes of someone who's seen too much, and they weren't wrong. Jack rarely spoke unless he had to, but when he did, his voice carried a calm authority, the voice of someone who had survived storms louder than words. That night, he drove home in his old white pickup, wipers squealing across the windshield, headlights slicing through curtains of rain. The cab smelled faintly of oil and coffee, and of Ranger, his 6-year-old German shepherd, dozing in the passenger seat. Ranger was a proud, sturdy dog, black and tan coat slick with rain from the brief dash out of the warehouse. He had a faint scar above his right eye, a mark from his service years beside Jack in Afghanistan. Where Jack went, Ranger followed, silent, loyal, unshakable. Jack turned off the main road, the truck humming low as it climbed a narrow path toward his cabin. Then he saw it, something small and dark lying in the puddle ahead, half hidden in the flickering beam of his headlights. At first, he thought it was a piece of tire rubber, but then it moved. Jack slowed, squinting through the rain. The shape twitched, a fragile, trembling thing, no bigger than a loaf of bread. His heart squeezed, a reflex older than reason. He muttered, "Ah, hell," and pulled to the side of the road. Ranger lifted his head, ears pricking, a soft growl rising in his throat. Jack grabbed his flashlight, stepped into the downpour and crouched low beside the tiny creature. It was shivering so hard it looked like it might vanish into the mud. Wet black fur clung to its ribs. Its ears, too large for its head, drooped like wilted leaves. When he reached out, it didn't bark. It only made a sound somewhere between a squeak and a sigh. "Easy now," Jack murmured. His hands were rough, cracked from years of handling rope and iron, but they moved gently. He lifted the little body into his arms. It weighed almost nothing. The creature pressed its head against his chest, seeking warmth, and he could feel its heart fluttering like a trapped bird. Ranger barked once from the truck, sharp and uneasy. Jack looked back, rain streaming down his beard. "It's okay, buddy," he said softly. "We're just helping the little one." He tucked the creature inside his jacket, shielding it from the rain. By the time he reached the truck, it had stopped trembling. Ranger sniffed the air, hackles slightly raised. But when Jack slid in, the big dog only turned away, resting his head on his paws with a low rumble. The drive home felt longer than usual. Each bump in the road made Jack glance at the bundle cradled against his chest. "You're gonna be fine, little fella," he whispered. "Ain't no one left behind. You hear?" That phrase, "no one left behind," was something he hadn't said since the desert. The memory cut deep. The heat, the noise, the comrades who didn't make it back. Maybe that was why he couldn't ignore the small, helpless thing by the road. Saving it, in some quiet way, felt like redemption. When he reached the cabin, the storm howled through the pines. The place was humble, a single-story wooden home with a tin roof and a porch sagging slightly at one corner. Inside, it smelled of pine soap, wet dog, and the faint trace of burnt coffee. Jack lit the lamp on the table, casting a pool of warm amber light across the room. He laid the small creature on an old flannel shirt near the fireplace. Steam rose from its fur as it warmed. Ranger came closer, sniffing carefully, his amber eyes wary but curious. The little thing stirred, blinking open a pair of wide, dark eyes that shimmered strangely in the firelight. Jack smiled. "Guess you're tougher than you look." He poured warm milk into a saucer, sliding it closer. The creature leaned forward, tongue flicking hesitantly, then began to lap it up. "Good," Jack whispered. "You'll make it." He thought for a while, then said, "You need a name, huh?" His eyes softened as he leaned back, watching the flames dance. "Scout," he murmured. "That's what I'll call you. You look like you've seen things, too." Ranger circled once and settled near the hearth, though his gaze never left the newcomer. The night stretched quiet, except for the ticking rain on the roof and the faint crackle of wood. Hours later, Jack carried Scout to the small cot beside his bed, where Ranger usually slept. The puppy, or what he thought was a puppy, curled tightly into a ball, tail tucked, breath shallow. Jack lay down, exhaustion pulling at him, but a strange peace filling the spaces where loneliness had lived. When he finally drifted off, the storm outside softened to a whisper. But sometime after midnight, Ranger's ears twitched. The big dog lifted his head, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Scout stirred, opening its own eyes, and in the pitch-black cabin, they gleamed an eerie, pale gold, bright as molten metal. Ranger growled low, the sound deep and warning, as if he sensed something ancient stirring inside the tiny creature his master had rescued. Jack slept on, unaware that the night had already shifted, that his act of mercy had awakened something wild. Morning came to the Montana Valley, wrapped in mist, the kind that made the mountains look like they were still dreaming. Jack stood by the porch, his mug steaming in his hand, watching Ranger and Scout in the yard. The little creature, no longer as tiny as the night he'd found it, bounded awkwardly through the wet grass. Its fur had thickened, black as coal with faint silver streaks that caught the morning light. The paws were growing faster than the rest of its body, and when it ran, it moved with a strange, elastic grace that felt too precise. Ranger kept his distance, circling, every now and then glancing toward Jack as if asking, "Are you sure about this?" Jack sipped his coffee, his breath fogging in the cold air. "He's just a pup," he murmured, though something in his gut twisted with doubt. After breakfast, Jack went to work at the freight yard, leaving Scout in a pen near the porch with Ranger watching over it. The day passed in the steady rhythm of labor, steel cables, wooden crates, the clatter of forklifts. Jack's boss, Ray Douglas, a stocky man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard and a voice like gravel, clapped him on the shoulder during the lunch break. "You still livin' out there by yourself, Miller?" "Not exactly," Jack replied with a faint grin. "Picked up a stray last week." Ray chuckled. "Man like you, rescuing a dog. I'll be damned. You got a soft spot after all." He took a drag from his cigarette, squinting through the smoke. "You ever think about getting out of that cabin? Maybe closer to town?" Jack shook his head. "Too many people. Ranger likes the quiet." Ray nodded knowingly. "Quiet's good, till it ain't." He said it like a man who'd learned that the hard way. By the time Jack returned home, twilight was settling. Ranger greeted him with his usual low bark, tail wagging once, then still. Scout came darting from behind the porch steps, bigger again, eyes gleaming with sharp curiosity. Jack crouched down. "Hey there, Scout." The creature pressed its head against his hand, nuzzling affectionately. Later that night, Jack poured kibble into 2 bowls, one for Ranger, one for Scout. Ranger ate immediately, crunching noisily. Scout only sniffed, nose wrinkling, before padding away. Jack frowned. What, too fancy for store food? He tried mixing it with milk, then bits of cooked chicken. Scout only stared, unblinking, and let out a soft, strange, churring noise, almost like a bird. When Jack looked away, he caught something else. Scout pacing the window, staring out toward the dark tree line, as if listening to something beyond human hearing. He felt the unease again, the one he'd been ignoring since that first night. But then Scout turned back, climbed onto his lap, and rested its head on his knee, just like any grateful pet. And Jack's heart softened, same as it always did. Days passed. Scout grew faster than any dog Jack had ever seen. Its limbs lengthened, its eyes deepened into a pale amber hue that almost glowed at dusk. It didn't bark, didn't whine, but it watched, always watching, always studying. Ranger tolerated it, but never played rough, as if instinct told him this wasn't one of his kind. One afternoon, while the sun slipped behind the ridges, Jack tossed a worn tennis ball into the field. "Go on, Scout. Bring it back." Scout sprinted after it with astonishing speed, low and silent, returning with a predator's precision. When Ranger joined, the air shifted. Ranger barked playfully, but Scout's body stiffened. The game changed. Scout lunged too fast, claws grazing Ranger's muzzle. A yelp broke the quiet. Blood welled where the paw had struck. "Hey!" Jack ran over, heart pounding. He knelt beside Ranger, checking the wound. Just a shallow scratch, but too deep, too sharp for a puppy's nails. He turned toward Scout. The creature crouched low, tail between its legs, ears flattened. Jack sighed, rubbing his forehead. All right. Just an accident." He patched Ranger up, though the big dog refused to take his eyes off Scout for the rest of the evening. The next day, Jack was loading his truck when a voice called over the fence. "Jack, that the new mutt you got?" It was Martha Hill, his neighbor from 2 houses down. A woman in her late 60s with hair white as frost, bundled in a wool coat and rubber boots. She raised chickens and had an opinion about everything. delivered with a disarming smile. Jack chuckled. Yeah, found him in the rain last week? Martha leaned on the fence, squinting. Well, I'll be... That ain't no dog I've ever seen. Look at those eyes, honey. You sure that's not a wolf pup? Jack laughed uneasily. A wolf? Out here? Nah, just a little lost stray, that's all. Martha tilted her head. You'd better hope so. Folks around here don't take kindly to wild ones near their farms. Her tone was casual, but her gaze lingered on Scout, sharp and knowing. That night, Jack couldn't shake her words. A wolf pup. It sounded ridiculous. And yet, as he sat by the fireplace, Scout lay at his feet, tail curled neatly around its body. The flames reflected in its eyes, and for a moment, Jack swore he saw not fear, but intelligence, an awareness too old for something so young. He whispered, almost to himself, You're just a dog, right? Scout lifted its head at his voice, staring straight into him with those strange amber eyes. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. Outside, the wind howled across the trees, and Ranger let out a single low growl. Not of warning this time, but of understanding, as if even he had begun to realize the truth. And somewhere deep in Jack's chest, the first real thread of doubt took root. Cold and steady, the third week brought a strange stillness to the woods surrounding Jack's cabin. The days were short, the air crisp enough to sting the lungs, and every sound seemed amplified. The snap of twigs underfoot, the cry of crows echoing through the valley. One evening, as dusk crept in, Jack stood by the porch stacking firewood, while Ranger dozed nearby. Scout sat a few yards away, its nose lifted toward the darkening forest. Then it happened. A long, distant howl rolled through the trees. It wasn't the sharp bark of a farm dog, but a wild, haunting sound that rose and fell like a memory of something ancient. Scout froze. Then, to Jack's astonishment, it tilted its head back and released a smaller, trembling version of the same sound. The note hung in the cold air like smoke. Ranger leapt to his feet, barking furiously, tail stiff, fur bristling. Jack's heart clenched. "Hey, enough!" he shouted, rushing forward. He scooped Scout up, feeling the creature's muscles quivering beneath his palms. Its eyes gleamed gold in the half-light, pupils thin and sharp. Jack hurried inside, slamming the door behind him. The fire crackled, but the warmth did nothing for the chill inside him. Scout lay curled by the hearth, its ears twitching, restless. Ranger paced by the window, whining under his breath. Jack rubbed his temples, the soldier's instinct that had once saved his life, whispering again, "Something isn't right." By morning, sleep had done little to ease his mind. The sky was pale and brittle, snow threatening at the edges. He couldn't shake what he'd seen, the sound that had clawed at something deep in his chest. Maybe it was nothing, he told himself. Maybe he was overreacting. But as Scout leapt lightly onto the counter, higher than any puppy could, and sniffed the cold window pane, Jack knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. He made a call to the local clinic, and by noon, the truck was rumbling down the frosted road toward town. Scout sat in a crate beside him, silent, unbothered. Ranger rode in the back seat, restless, emitting a low growl every few minutes, as if to protest the entire journey. The veterinary clinic sat on the corner of Main and Hillcrest, a small white building with a green roof and a hand-painted sign that read, "Dr. Samuel Harris, Veterinary Care and Wildlife Services." Inside, the place smelled of antiseptic and hay. A young assistant named Lisa Tron greeted him at the front desk. She was in her late 20s, small-framed with sharp eyes and a kind smile that softened her professional tone. "Good morning. You're Mr. Miller, right? You brought in Scout?" Jack nodded, setting the crate on the counter. "He's been actin' strange, doesn't eat normal food, and last night he hesitated, unsure how to say it without sounding foolish. He howled, like something wild." Lisa's brow furrowed slightly, but she smiled again. "Dr. Harris will take a look. He's been working with wildlife for 30 years. Nothing surprises him anymore." Moments later, Dr. Samuel Harris entered the room. He was in his early 60s, tall, stooped slightly from years spent bending over examination tables. His gray hair was cropped short, his jaw lined with days of stubble, and his blue eyes held that particular kind of gentleness that belongs only to those who have seen suffering too often. He had once worked as a field biologist before settling down in this quiet town, a man whose curiosity had long outlasted his youth. "All right, Mr. Miller," he said, his voice calm and gravelly. "Let's meet your little friend." Jack lifted Scout from the crate and set it on the metal table. The creature blinked at the bright overhead light, but didn't flinch. Its fur gleamed with a faint silver sheen under the lamp. Dr. Harris examined it carefully, starting with the paws. "Pads are rougher than a domestic pup's," he murmured. He parted its jaws slightly, frowning. "Teeth are sharper, too. Not quite right for 6 weeks old." He lifted one ear, Then another, his movements slow but deliberate. Jack shifted uneasily. Is it sick? The doctor didn't answer right away. He checked the eyes next. That's when something in his expression changed, curiosity giving way to alarm. Lisa, he said quietly, can you dim the lights for a moment? She did. The room darkened, and for a heartbeat, silence ruled. Then Scout's pupils flared, glowing faintly gold, like embers. Dr. Harris straightened, pale. You said you found this. Where exactly? By the road, Jack replied, voice tight. Just outside the woods, near Flat Creek. The doctor's jaw clenched. Flat Creek, that's near the Canadian line. He took a breath, eyes fixed on Scout. Mr. Miller, I don't think this is a dog. Jack frowned. What are you saying? Dr. Harris looked from Jack to the animal, then back again. This looks like a Canis lupus occidentalis cub, a northwestern wolf pup, possibly separated from its pack, or worse, from a den disrupted by poachers. Jack stared in disbelief. A wolf? No, that can't be right. Lisa, who had been standing quietly, spoke softly. Doctor, that area's been flagged recently for illegal trapping. The words hit Jack like a hammer. He looked down at Scout, who sat calmly, blinking up at him, its expression strangely knowing. Dr. Harris's tone gentled, but his eyes remained grave. You didn't do anything wrong, Mr. Miller. You saved it. But this animal doesn't belong in a house. Its instincts are wild. In time, it'll outgrow you, and it won't mean harm, but it will be dangerous. Jack swallowed hard, his hands tightening into fists. So what do I do now? The doctor hesitated. Let me contact Wildlife Services. They'll know what to... But Jack wasn't listening anymore. Scout had turned toward him, ears pricked, gaze locked onto his, face. In those amber eyes, Jack didn't see an animal. He saw recognition, something deep and unexplainable, as if the creature understood every word spoken in that room. And for the first time since finding it, Jack felt both awe and dread in equal measure. The morning after the visit to Dr. Harris, Jack woke to silence thick enough to press against his ribs. The air outside was brittle with frost. Even the birds seemed hesitant to break it. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the folded sheet of paper the vet had handed him, the contact for the local wildlife authority. He hadn't called yet. He couldn't. Across the room, Scout slept beside the wood stove, its body larger now, muscles more defined beneath the dark pelt. The creature no longer looked like a puppy. Its shoulders had broadened, its legs lean and powerful. It was beautiful, in a way that unsettled him, like something built by nature to survive anything. Ranger lay close, but watchful, tail flicking every so often, his loyalty now split between affection and instinct. The town of Clearwater had always been quiet, but nothing stayed secret for long. By midweek, whispers began to stir like dust in the grocery aisles and the diner booths. A trucker had seen Jack carrying the strange black animal into the vet's office. And by the time the story reached Linda Parks, the woman who ran the local diner, it had turned into something much bigger. Linda, a stout woman with chestnut curls pinned high and a sharp tongue softened only by compassion, told everyone she met that she'd always liked Jack. But there's something mighty strange about that animal he's got. At the freight yard, Ray Douglas cornered Jack during lunch, his expression heavy with concern. "People are talking, Jack," he said quietly, leaning against a crate. "Saying you're keeping some kind of wild thing up there. Maybe a wolf." Jack stiffened. "They can talk. It's just a rumor." Ray sighed, running a hand over his gray beard. "I get it, man. You've had enough taken from you already. But if the sheriff gets involved, it won't be just talk." That evening, the sound of an engine approached Jack's cabin. A white county truck stopped at the gate. 2 figures stepped out, their breath fogging in the cold. The first was Sheriff Dale Rowan, a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with a weathered face, gray mustache, and eyes that carried the fatigue of 25 years on the job. He'd known Jack since high school, back before war, and distance had carved different roads between them. "Evenin', Jack," he called, voice steady, but cautious. Beside him stood Officer Hannah Brooks, a young wildlife officer, tall and lean, with auburn hair pulled tight beneath her cap and a clipboard clutched to her chest. She looked barely 30, her expression professional, but not unkind. Jack stepped off the porch, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. "You hear about the rumors?" Rowan nodded. "Afraid so. Got a few calls saying you might be harboring a dangerous animal. We just need to take a look, settle it." Jack hesitated, then opened the door. Inside, Scout lifted its head, those gold eyes sharp even in the dim light. Ranger stood protectively beside it. Hannah took one step in and froze. "That's no dog," she murmured. Rowan frowned. "You sure, Hannah?" She nodded grimly. "That's a wolf pup. I've seen them before during relocation programs up north." Jack's chest tightened. "He's not dangerous. He's just lost." "Maybe," Rowan said gently, "but rules are rules. You'll need to contact Wildlife Services. They'll relocate it. Make sure it's safe." Jack looked down at Scout, who stared back with something that wasn't fear, but trust. And what if they don't find it a place? What then? Neither officer answered. Rowan placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. You did right by saving it, but this ain't on you anymore. Call them, Jack, before someone else does. After they left, night fell heavy. Jack sat by the fire, the orange glow cutting sharp across his face. Scout lay beside him, head resting on his boot. Ranger settled close, tail thumping once before going still. Jack reached down, fingers brushing Scout's fur. They don't understand, he whispered. You're not a monster. For hours, he sat there, the weight of the decision pressing on him. To keep Scout was to risk the law, and maybe lives. But letting it go felt like losing a part of himself he hadn't realized was still alive. The next morning, letters appeared in his mailbox, some anonymous, others signed. One called him a hero. Another warned him to get rid of that thing before it kills something. The local paper ran a small column titled Veteran's Wolf Raises Concern in Clearwater. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes on him, pity, fear, or judgment. Ranger became restless. He barked at shadows near the tree line, nose twitching at scents only he could read. One night, Jack woke to find Scout standing by the window, body tense, staring into the forest. Outside, the wind carried faint howls again, distant, mournful, and familiar. Ranger barked once, then stopped. He looked back at Jack, then at Scout, and in that quiet moment, something unspoken passed between the two animals. Understanding, maybe even farewell. Jack knelt beside them, running a hand over Ranger's head. Guess we always knew this wasn't forever, huh? His voice cracked, the words small in the flicker of the fire. Scout turned toward him, pressing its head against his hand. For a heartbeat, it felt like gratitude, or goodbye. Sometime before dawn, the door creaked open. Jack stirred awake. The fire burned low. Scout was gone. Only the wind answered his call. On the porch, half buried in snow, lay the old flannel scarf he had wrapped around the creature the night he'd found it. It fluttered faintly in the breeze, a ghost of warmth left behind. Jack fell to his knees, clutching it in silence, as Ranger pressed close beside him, whining softly. Both man and dog staring into the forest, where love had chosen freedom. Winter melted slowly into spring, though in Montana, spring meant more mud than flowers. The mountains still wore streaks of white, and the wind carried the last breath of snow across the valley. Jack Miller spent most mornings fixing fence lines and hauling lumber for the ranchers nearby. His hands, rough as bark, were always busy. It kept him from thinking too much. Ranger trotted beside him as he worked, the old German shepherd's fur graying around the muzzle now, eyes calm but sharp. Every so often, the dog would stop and stare toward the forest, ears flicking as if listening for a ghost. It had been 3 months since Scout disappeared. At first, Jack searched every ridge and ravine for miles, calling until his voice cracked. But he found nothing, only tracks that vanished into the deep woods. Eventually, life settled back into its lonely rhythm. Yet at night, when the fire burned low, Jack still felt something watching from the tree line. Not menace, presence. One morning in early June, Ray Douglas showed up at the yard, his face flushed beneath his sun-beaten cap. "Jack, you heard about the Carlson farm?" he said, breathing hard. "Coyotes or something tore through their sheep last night. Whole herd spooked. But the weird part is, some folks say another pack chased them off. Wolves, black ones, drove the attackers away." Jack froze mid-motion, the wrench slipping from his hand. "Wolves?" he repeated quietly. Ray nodded. "Sheriff Rowan's up there now. Says it's the damnedest thing he's ever seen. You ought to take a look. You know your way with animals, better than most." By noon, Jack and Ranger were bouncing down the dirt road toward the Carlson farm. The countryside rolled open around them, pastures dotted with barns and fence posts leaning like old soldiers. When they arrived, Sheriff Rowan stood near a collapsed section of fence, his jacket dusted with straw. The sheriff's face was pale beneath his mustache, and beside him knelt Eli Carlson, the farmer, a wiry man in his 40s, with sun-cracked skin and a limp from an old rodeo injury. His voice trembled as he gestured toward the field. "They came out of nowhere, Sheriff. Big gray pack, must have been 7 or 8 of them. Cornered my ewes right here. I thought we were done for." Rowan motioned for Jack to come closer. Then something else showed up," Eli said, lowering his voice as if afraid the woods might hear. "Another pack. Smaller. Fast. They tore into the grays like lightning. Saved the herd, far as I can tell. Never seen wolves fight wolves like that." Jack crouched, tracing the ground with calloused fingers. There were paw prints everywhere, 2 sets, overlapping, chaotic. One set large and heavy, the other lighter but longer. His heart began to hammer. "These smaller tracks," he murmured. "They're from the northern breed. See the stride? They move low." Ranger sniffed along the trail, tail wagging slowly. Then he stopped and let out a low, eager bark, nose pressed to something tangled in the grass. Jack stepped closer. There, snagged on a broken post, was a shred of flannel, faded red and gray. His breath caught. He knew that fabric. It was from the old shirt he'd torn months ago, the same one he'd wrapped around Scout to keep it warm that first night. Rowan looked at him. "You recognize that?" Jack's throat worked, but no sound came. He simply nodded. They followed the tracks to the edge of the forest, where the land dipped into shadow. The air cooled instantly, thick with pine and damp earth. From somewhere deeper in the trees came a single howl, low, rich, commanding. Ranger stiffened beside him, ears perked. Another answered, then another. And then, between the trunks, Jack saw movement. A shape emerged from the green gloom. A great black wolf, taller than any he'd ever seen, coat sleek and shining like wet obsidian. Its eyes caught the dying light of afternoon and burned gold. Around its neck hung the torn scrap of flannel, weathered but unmistakable. Jack's breath left him in a rush. "Scout," he whispered. The wolf stood motionless for a moment, watching him. Then it stepped forward, slow, deliberate. Ranger wagged his tail once, whined softly, and barked as if in greeting. The wolf's ears twitched, and for a heartbeat, it almost looked like it smiled. Eli stumbled backward. "Good Lord, that thing's huge." "Don't shoot," Jack said quickly, though no one had raised a weapon. "It won't hurt us." Rowan placed a steadying hand on Eli's shoulder. "You know that wolf, don't you?" Jack nodded faintly, his voice rough. "Yeah, I raised it." The black wolf gave one last glance toward him, then turned back toward the forest. 3 smaller shapes moved behind it. Young wolves, gray and brown, their movements hesitant but strong. A family. Scout had found its place. As the wolf disappeared into the shadows, the air felt different. Lighter. Sacred, somehow. Jack stood in silence, tears mixing with the dust on his cheeks. Ranger barked again, a single clear note that echoed through the trees like a benediction. Rowan sighed, tipping his hat. "Guess that settles it," he said softly. "Not every rescue ends in a cage." Jack smiled through his tears. "No, some just find their way home." That night, back at the cabin, Jack sat on the porch while the sun sank behind the ridges. Ranger lay at his feet, head resting on the old flannel scrap Jack had retrieved. From far off, across the darkening valley, a familiar howl rose, a deep, resonant sound that filled the spaces between heartbeats. Jack closed his eyes, listening, and for the first time in years, peace settled over him like gentle rain. Scout was free, alive, and somehow still near. Love, he realized, wasn't about holding on. It was about letting the wild remember where it came from and knowing it would never forget you. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or wings. They come quietly, in the shape of a creature we were never meant to meet, in the bond that bridges fear and faith. Jack's story reminds us that even in our loneliest moments, God sends us something, or someone, to remind us that love is never lost, only transformed. Scout's return wasn't just nature's way of saying thank you. It was a whisper from heaven. That kindness is never wasted, that every act of mercy echoes far beyond what our eyes can see. The Lord's hand works through simple hearts, a veteran's compassion, a dog's loyalty, a wolf's freedom, weaving grace into the ordinary. And maybe that's the true miracle. Not that Jack found Scout, but that God used their journey to heal a soul long scarred by war. As you finish this story, take a moment to reflect. Perhaps there's something wild and wounded in your own life that needs understanding rather than fear. Perhaps God is calling you, in His quiet way, to care, to forgive, to let go, or to set something free. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and comment below. Let others feel the same warmth of faith and redemption. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories where love, nature, and divine grace meet in the most unexpected ways. May God bless you and your family, and may His light guide all who open their hearts, just as it guided Jack, Ranger, and Scout through the forest of mercy.